All right. It seems that we are finally live. I want everyone to say if you could see the display, if everything is working all right. If sound is working, I'm going to do my test right now. I want everyone to... All right, everything seems great. And from this, we are going to start up on our talk today about Gustav Klimt. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to ask them in the chat. But without further ado, Gustav Klimt. So, after last week's conversation about Goya, I was thinking we had enough darkness, we have to move on to something light, something beautiful, something that everyone can relate to. And the first thought that entered my head was Gustav Klimt. Klimt is such an incredible artist that, in a way, shows us the real beauty of the world. And he doesn't show it in the Rococo style, which, if you listened to me last time, you know I have feelings about. He shows it in an incredibly modern way. In fact, I think Klimt is the best artist that reflects what we have right now, what our modern situation. And I'm going to get into this for a couple of reasons. But a couple of things that you have to think about before we go. Those are... I'm sorry, small break for thought right there. But those are that Klimt, one, is ultramodern. Klimt put before himself problems that were plaguing his time, that were in the just emerging Freudian period, in Vienna, of course, before the First World War. And he was addressing the problems that have been repressed since essentially the Renaissance. Throughout the whole humanist period, we did not talk about sex. Klimt brings this topic up, and he also brings it up in a way that is completely new to European art. I say European because he draws on inspiration from three backgrounds. And I'm going to call this the East and the Further East. His three huge influences, as you're going to see, is ancient Egypt, it's medieval Byzantium, and it's medieval Japan. So, where do we get started with Klimt? First of all, born. He was born, and this is very important, he was born in a family of a goldsmith. It was a huge family. His father never had the money to feed his kids. He earned barely what Klimt would earn as a student in school. And the family was giant. Klimt had a lot of brothers and even more sisters. And out of all of them, we have to remember just Gustav himself and his brother Ernst, because together, for the first couple of years of Klimt's career, they would be inseparable. But, as you're going to see right now, first, let's talk about what he did as a child. This is drawings from once he entered art school, if I'm not mistaken. In these ones, he is around 14 or 15. And you can see his technique is incredible as far as everything goes. He had an incredible teacher in art, and more specifically in art history. This is why one of my main goals with doing this. Learning art history comes up in ways where you could never possibly imagine. And his art history teacher gave him a thorough examination of not just drawing and painting, but also mosaics, which, if you're going to look at Klimt's style later on, you're going to see just straight up there. So what do we have here? Standard academic drawing, but as always people say, if you want to break the style, you're going to have to learn how to do it first. So, incredible start. Another example of his work, this time I think in Art Academy, in one of the more university settings. This one's unique, and why I included this alongside the previous couple of sketches is because Klimt would never draw men later in his life. I mean, not never, he will have some, but you could basically count them on the fingers of one hand, how many men he includes in his drawings. And he always said this for two reasons. He said simply that men, and even himself, they don't interest him. He never made self-portraits, although we're going to disprove that a bit later on. But the fact that he was definitely more interested in women and in female sexuality is crucial. But he knows his anatomy, unlike Goya, where we saw last time. So, Klimt is out of art school, and he starts working for this Austrian artist. He was a symbolist painter because symbolism was all the rage in the early 20th century. What is symbolism? Well, it's a bit tough to explain because what symbolism entails is what, in a pop culture understanding of art history, we would call realistic. Although it isn't. Like, if you take a look at this painting, this is Klimt's first big work, it's called The Fable, you're going to think that, oh, it's drawn in a realistic style. It's not. Realism is Millet, realism is Courbet. It shows life the way that it is. Symbolism, on the other hand, sure, it may look quote-unquote realistic, but it's a lot closer to surrealism than you think. It shows life as this idealized, kind of airy thing. And if you look at the founders of the symbolist movement, the pre-Raphaelites with Dante Gabriel Rossetti, you're going to see what I mean. They don't show life the way it is. Sure, they may have an almost photographic representation of what it is, but what is crucial and what Klimt is going to take from symbolism for the rest of his life is this idea that everything in a painting has to be a symbol. You could try deciphering them on your own here. This isn't my job. This one I especially love. What you can see is, again, at first glance, another symbolist artwork, Gustav Klimt's initials right in the bottom right corner right there. But this one I include for a different reason. Klimt knows the history of world art incredibly well. And when I say that he has a lot more Eastern influences than he has European influences, that doesn't mean he doesn't know European art. This right here is a clear showing that Klimt was not just aware of, but extensively copied Michelangelo. Now, whether he copied his reproductions or whether he went to Rome and copied these from the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, I don't know. But these are nudity that you could see when you look up on the ceiling, and if you ignore the popular Birth of Adam and so on, the design that Michelangelo gives, I'm not going to describe it. Go Google Michelangelo's nudity, and you're going to see that Klimt took the poses and the musculature right from there. Klimt extensively sketches, and I am going to have the huge joy of showing you a bunch of his sketches today, something which a lot of people ignore when compared to his golden paintings. But I want you to see his sketching technique is impeccable. When he wants to, I'm going to use the word realistic, although I don't want to. When he wants to give a realistic approach, when he wants to show you a photographic representation of what he's doing, he can. Doesn't mean he wants to. So, moving on. So, Klimt worked alongside his brother Ernst and a third artist, which we are going to ignore for the sake of time today, and they worked under this Austrian artist named Hans Makarth. And their first big job together was to organize the design of one of the theaters in Vienna, the Berghaus Theater. The frescoes in that theater were supposed to show the different eras of theater, as you may imagine. And it was supposed to go from ancient Greek to to Elizabethan, to modern, and so on and so forth. This is where the interest in different formats comes from with Klimt's artworks, because interior design is vastly different from just normal art. With interior design, you got to think about how it's going to look inside of the room, where it's going to fit, and so Klimt knows exactly what to do. he fits this incredibly wide composition in a strange shape, and he does it masterfully. I'm going to show you a zoom in of this artwork in a second, just to show you how detailed it's worked through. But as you can see, he could work in this approach. He can give what the popular, vulgar, absolutely people of Vienna want. He can give them these half-dressed women in airy poses that could do not too much excitement, is what I'm getting at. Klimt is going to push that line later on, and I'm just going to zoom in right here to show you. It is worked through incredibly, and you could see the influences Byzantium had on him. This is where the gold comes from. So together with their teacher, these three worked together, and they were in college, and during this time, Klimt, as I said, was making way more money than his father was, and he was now supporting his family. I want you to remember that everything that Klimt does is to support his family. He, even when he's going to get into depression, even if he's going to have problems in his work, he's not going to stop working, and that's what amazes me about him. Another example from this, the Globe Theatre, as I said, the Burghaus was supposed to have the representation of different times, and this is Elizabethan theater, of course. And so, as you can see, Klimt can draw men. The, in a way, legend that says that Klimt could only draw women and he never draw men because he couldn't. He definitely could. His technique is on point with everything that he does. So they continue on with this kind of design, and Klimt has one last request for the Burg Theater, and this is a portrait, not a portrait, but a painting of the layout of the inside. This is photographic. Every single face that you see here, if you want to, you could Google this painting and zoom into every one of these. This is a photograph. So you can imagine the work that went into a painting like this, and it's really small. If you imagine artworks, most of the time, they're smaller than you think, and this is not an exception. But the way he worked through every single one of these, I could say if Klimt didn't want to paint men from this point on, it's completely in his right. He drew enough in this one alone. So now I want you to show a couple of images that show you where Klimt came from. So this is his teacher, Hans Makart, and this was the next gig that they all had together, and this was the design of the Museum of Art History in Vienna. And so to those people who think that Klimt, out of nowhere, invented using gold in his artworks, I'm sorry, you're wrong, because even his teacher shows that he could do it like this. Of course, Klimt is going to be a lot more creative than this, but it's still an amazing showing. And Makart is a great symbolist painter. He has a great sense of humor, which is really useful for an artist. This is his set inside of that museum of Hans Holbein, drawing one of King Henry VIII's numerous wives. And it's funny. I can't say anything else. He continues this set on with Rubens, of course, with one of his models. And just for a difference, Michelangelo. To those who think that models only need to be pretty women that hang around, you're wrong, because Michelangelo is an incredible example of a gay artist who does that with the same, if not more, energy than everyone else. I'm sorry, Puritans. Also, in any case, if any Puritans are in fact here, it's going to get a lot more sexual than this, so if this is a good time for you to sign off and enjoy the history of world art without nudity and without sex, please sign off and have a great day. So, I'm showing you this just to say that Klimt didn't invent the inclusions of gold in his artwork. He didn't invent it, but he's going to perfect it a lot. And with this, we come to these continuations of the Museum of Art History. So Makart died during the work on this museum, and Klimt, his brother and his friend, they picked up the design, There wasn't a lot left, there were just these spaces, and I want you to see how incredibly Klimt works with composition. He fits this figure in a beautiful way into the design. If you're ever at this museum in art history, you're going to see how it fits in, how it doesn't distract you, even though you might feel like it overloads you. And of course, over here you start to see these gold inclusions that Klimt is going to use later on. And in a way, like I said, it should overload you with the Egyptian patterns and so on. But it doesn't. And Klimt is a master of using this, what should be negative space, and still filling it with these patterns and elements. After this, he continues on with some independent work. And here's the problem with Klimt. Every time that he has done something, it caused a scandal automatically. No matter what he did, people always referred to his work as either too pornographic, too vulgar, too brute. But Puritanism has always been a case in European history. In any case, despite everyone saying how vulgar and how horrible his paintings were, he still had enormous popularity. And he had this popularity for a couple of reasons. First of all, he was an honest artist. He was able to show people the way they were, and that's what's going to make his portraits so appealing later on. And second of all, Klimt is just nice to have around in the house. We talked last time about Goya. You wouldn't really want to live in the same room with Goya. Even his early artworks give off something fake. Klimt, although he is this symbolist artist who has absolutely nothing to do with reality, he, in a way, kind of fits in, and you could feel what he was thinking. This is his allegory of sculpture, and he's going to do a lot of allegories throughout his life. We're going to see their culmination in a bit. But, first of all, the idea of the allegory is not a new one, of course, but it was always used to explain some dark concepts, especially from religion. Scenes of hell, for example, were always put through allegories. And Klimt, he doesn't introduce allegories for something light, but he is the best at it, in my opinion. This is probably, I can't speak for Klimt, but I believe that he did this artwork based on Pygmalion and Galathea, and he wants to always show love in his artworks. Love in all ways, love in non-Puritan ways, even more. That's going to be a theme for today. But when Klimt wanted to be cultured, he could be. Although if you know the story of Sappho, you're going to see how still this is a provocation for everyone around him. His earlier works are really restrained in a way. And I'm not going to stop for too long at this. I just want you to get an idea of how an artist develops on throughout his life. With this painting, we reach a milestone. Again, this is a symbolist artwork, but over here, this is a complete portrait. So who we have here are the two Floge sisters. And the Floge sisters are going to play an enormous role in Klimt's life. His brother Ernst is going to marry one of them, and Klimt is going to have a lifelong friendship with the other one. We're going to get to her in a second. But with his friendship with the Floge sisters, it's going to open up many, many doors for him. And so we get to her. We get to Emilia Floge. To people who think that she was Klimt's muse and she just hovered around him and gave him inspiration, no, she wasn't. In fact, we don't even know if they even slept together and if they had any sort of relationship. No, she was just his friend throughout his life. And I don't think it even matters whether they had a relationship or not, because this, to me, is an ideal artistic partnership. Emilia was a fashion designer, and she owned a salon in Vienna. And through her customers, she was able to give Klimt access to some of the more higher-ups in Austrian society who would buy his art. And on the other hand, he would help her out by designing dresses for her and for her salon. We're going to see a couple later on. They are just as fantastic as his artworks, in my opinion. But This isn't the best portrait of Amelia, and we're going to see how he develops this portrait later on, which leads us to another theme of Klimt. Klimt is a master of repetition. He takes one subject and he does it over and over to perfect it. Now, the first one may be an amazing portrait like this, but with each succession, he's going to show a different side, a different, in a way, a different emotional specter of what could be the same exact person, whether it be by technique or even by light choice. So, Emilia Floge led him on to his first major artwork, his first major supplier, I'm going to say. And we're going to stop for a quick moment right here. So, a couple of people like to call Klimt's early portrait stage as his Jewish stage, which is maybe slightly anti-Semitic, but most of the time the higher-ups of Viennese society were, in fact, Jewish businessmen. And they were cultured enough and they were smart enough to realize Klimt's potential and to order his work and supply him on forward. So this, I believe, is the daughter of one of the big magnates of Austria. And I'm not that interested in the person more than I'm interested in the artwork over here. On one hand, I'm going to draw another parallel with Goya last time. With Goya, his dresses were incredible, but his faces were more or less the same always. Klimt, completely opposite. He wants to learn about the person. He is going to explore her face. He wants to explore her emotions. And this is a lot more deep and a lot more, I'm going to say, truthful portrait than whatever Goya did. I'm not going to say that Klimt's treatment of fashion is bad. No, Klimt said that a face needs to be complemented by a good outfit. But if you zoom into the dress, you're going to see that it's just brushstrokes layered over and over. So there is no deep kind of work done on the dress, but it does its way. It feels light and airy and almost like feathers that are going to blow in the wind towards you when you see it. But another thing that I want you to notice is the amount of negative space in the painting. Another theme with Klimt. He is a master of leaving space out that you can immerse yourself into the painting. By all normal standards, basically half of the left side of the painting can be cropped off and nothing's going to be lost. But it's going to lose its airiness. And I'm going to say why. The square kind of format is pretty unique for modernist and for Art Nouveau art. They are a lot more with the long horizontals and the long verticals. We're going to see that later. But you don't see square canvases that often from them. And Klimt does this to address this kind of harmony. You can measure off by height and by width. The figure is pretty much equal. And it gives this sort of stability to a painting where black in the background and pink in the foreground should clash, but they don't because of this airiness and because of this feeling that he gives that puts you in. And if you see on the lower left corner of the painting this kind of smoky gray, that also makes you flow into the artwork. A wonderful, absolutely wonderful portrait. This I wanted to show you just for you to see Klimt's process, the way he does his artworks. 3 lines, and you're able to see the face that he's going to do later on. And while the pose may not be perfect, he captures the composition exactly. This is a unique case for Klimt because Klimt wouldn't usually let himself off with one sketch. He would have at least 50 before he would start to even consider working on the painting. He would sketch positions and he would combine them to all work together into one pose, and you're going to see that in a small moment. An absolutely wonderful lithograph right here, which is going to echo through his paintings later on. With this, I'm going to say with this print, he starts off being the artist of the sexual that we know him to be. His poses that he presented were considered erotic and pornographic. I mean, erotic is the right word to use here, but this isn't the vulgar pornography that people thought it was to be. Klimt wants to show feeling. He doesn't want to show just the process. In fact, Klimt never has pictures of sex going on in his painting. If you even search for them, you're not going to find any. But you're going to find feelings of love and sexual feelings that are, in a way, above anything that's going to be allowed even in Viennese society of the time. And there's a reason I brought up Freud earlier, because Klimt, which I doubt that he was a Freudian, Freud is really vulgar and really concrete, but Klimt takes that feeling, takes Freud's openness about the subject, and he runs with it for miles. Vienna was not ready for Klimt, it wasn't ready for Freud, and Austria-Hungary eventually collapsed, but that is a different story. This is the first artwork in Klimt's golden period, the Pallas Athena. This is the first movement. This is the first painting that he did in his Secession period. What is Secession? Everyone knows what Art Nouveau is. They like to think of it as this flowing, pretty picture. It wasn't that. It was an argument with the academics who thought that art should have photographic realism attached to it with all the loaded feelings that realism has to it. And that it shouldn't show something, it shouldn't reflect life. It shouldn't reflect feelings. It should instead focus on either the way the realists did it with pictures of ordinary life, and even then, that's a big question mark, but the safest subject for academic art was mythology and figures out of religious scenes. Klimt takes that and he turns it on its head. His women are stronger. His women are more woman-like in a way than anything else that the Academy could have produced. If you take a look at academic neoclassic art, you're going to see a bunch of nudes that are out of place and that are going to essentially just serve the purpose of being decorations for a bigger theme out of, say, a religious scene. Klimt doesn't do that. None of his figures are decorations. All of his women are people. And they're people, more specifically, with feelings attached to them. And this Pallas Athena, it's an amazing start to what's going to be a new movement. If you see in the background, right there, you're going to see how well Klimt knows the history of art. This is almost a direct copy of the amphoras that he probably saw. And we are finally seeing the gold that's going to come in. If you see what Athena is holding in her right hand, you're going to see the nude goddess of victory, Nika, and he's going to repeat that theme in a short moment, and we're going to get to that right now. But so far, Secession starts to make a name for itself, and they start to be incredibly popular in Vienna. There is no bad PR, as they say. Every kind of attention that you get is good attention. Even if people are not liking you, even if they're saying that your works are horrible, that's still good attention. So they start. Klimt, as I said, is a master of design, and I want you to see the difference. This is version 1 of the poster, and here's version 2. A wonderful example of self-censorship over there. If you notice the difference, I'm not going to point it out. But Klimt does an incredible job at popularizing his movement out. And about at this time, a couple of things happen. The first is that his brother dies. His brother Ernst, with whom they worked a lot, with whom they supported their family, he all of a sudden is dead. But what's worse is that right before he died, he married Emilia Floge's sister. So now, and they had a child. So now Klimt has to support not just his own family, but also the young Floge family. And despite the depression that the death of his brother put him in, he continues on working, which is, like I already said, an incredible quality that everyone should have. Klimt starts working on his second big artwork in his golden style, And in this one, I want you to take a look not at the figure in the center, although that is what pops at you first. It is the faint figure on the left. That is what's going to show up in his art. But like I said, Klimt does about 50 sketches before every artwork, and even this side pose, I feel, gave something to him that he would use in the next artwork. This is the nude Veritas. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds just to look at it and feel it coming at you. So, nude Veritas translates to naked truth, and here I want to make a distinction, because I've been using nude and naked a bit interchangeably, but I shouldn't. Nudity is, in a way, something artificial. It's where a model sits in front of you and you point out the exact pose which has happened. With nakedness, there's a certain feeling of helplessness attached to it, where you are naked to the elements. Everything is around you. The view of the people looking at the artwork should reflect that the subject is unprotected in a way to it. But this is a nude, exactly in the way that I mean. She is looking directly at you, holding up a mirror, looking at herself and admiring her own beauty, knowing her own worth. At the top, you have a quote from Schiller that goes something along the lines of, "If you cannot be loved by everyone, try to be loved by a few. To be loved by many is evil." And that is a message that Klimt would hold throughout his life. He was absolutely hated by certain people, but he had a certain very loyal following that continued on to this day. That even though Klimt is now popularized and out of every screen the designs by him pop out at you, they don't really get it. And there is a certain small group of people, which I hope that all of you are going to be a part of, that's going to appreciate the Klimt beyond the gold in a way. And of course, Klimt is a master of the space. You can see how thin the format is and how he makes it work absolutely incredibly. And he even manages to fit in his patterns in the background. I'm going to take a small break to look at the chat. Meanwhile, I want you to appreciate this artwork. All right, seeing no questions, we are going to continue on forward. Actually, I'm going to take a drink of water before that. And with this, we move on again to his sketches. I'm going to show a lot of those interchanged with his big works, just so you get a feeling of the preparation he did in between. Klimt had a studio in Vienna where basically at any moment he could just look at a model and tell them to start posing. He would have a bunch of women laying around, half clothed, half naked, fully naked, and at any moment Klimt would tell them to start posing. Posing is actually not the best word to use it. Klimt would have sex with them, and he would make them have sex with each other. He would allow them to free up their sexuality to themselves and to the entire world along them. And Klimt would draw. Maybe a lot of people can call him a misogynist, can call him a woman hater for this, but I don't think so. Klimt loved women. He loved them more than anything in the world. He loved them so much that he had over 40 children out of wedlock. But this is crucial. We are finally, after 500 years, since the time of essentially Michelangelo, who exposed the nude to us, since that time it was veiled up, it was included, but it was shown as more of a, like I said, a decoration, and the human behind it wasn't seen. We're finally coming back to embracing what the human is. And at this time, Klimt gets a big order for the for the University of Vienna. He was going to be a part of a bigger group of artists, and he himself was responsible for 3 murals in there. It was the 3 big subjects: philosophy, medicine, and jurisprudence. Why is this in black and white? Well, a couple of reasons. We have to first trace out the history of these artworks. Klimt took, as you can see by the dates, a long time to finish them. It took him almost 10 years. And while he was working, it caused an uproar with the staff. Because if you've ever seen a college professor, you know that they are old and that they don't want to hear anything about sex. Well, the professors did exactly that. They started a riot. They told the administration that this was horrible. Well, in reality, they just didn't want to see what they couldn't have staring down at them from the walls of their college. And the students, they would just look at that. They wouldn't look at anything else. This artwork was considered, alongside the other two, as pornographic. Again, a favorite slur that was used against Klimt over and over again. And it was essentially banned from the university. From there, it moved on to a government museum, and Klimt didn't want that. He finally decided he wanted to do nothing with the government and would commission nothing for them, wanted no commissions from them. And so through one of the friends that he made through and with one of the rich merchants that he was friends with through Emilia Floge, he decided to buy them out. He bought them out and he gifted them to this merchant, who bought them out for him so that they would never be in a government museum. Which is why the fact that there are so many of Klimt's artworks on exhibition now in Vienna's government museums is incredibly funny to me. He never wanted this. But then a sad story happened. During the Second World War, these artworks were hidden in one of the estates of this merchant in the Inhendorf Castle, if I'm not mistaken. And it was controlled by the local SS. And when the Allies were on the offensive in Austria, they were close to capturing the Inhendorf Castle. And so the SS set fire to it, destroying countless works of art by Klimt, including these, and a bunch of his sketches. What we have now are genius, but there are so much more that are completely lost to history. Thanks to these absolutely barbaric fascists. So, about the painting though. Philosophy, as you can see, is a very symbolist artwork in nature, but Klimt adds onto it his own perception. What we see here is a black and white photo of the artwork, which of course cannot be a reflection of the full thing that was probably absolutely majestic. But it can give us some ideas about what Klimt wanted. You could see in the background over there is the image fading into the sky of a sphinx, which is supposed to be an allegory for wisdom, for, if you remember the story of Oedipus, the sphinx that asks questions along the street and destroys everyone who doesn't give it answers. And that, in a way, is the same as philosophy. And the sphere in the foreground, or the sphere in Greece, was a representation of absolute wisdom, since it is the absolute perfect shape. So, a great loss for the art world. Medicine. We actually have a color photograph of this artwork, but it doesn't include the entirety of it. Medicine, again, if you want to see how to do composition, look at these murals. Klimt overloads a certain area, the right part of the canvas, with figures, with diseases, with death that torment the people around them, and absolutely shatters what is supposed to be a horrible composition with the figure in the foreground. This figure of medicine holding a snake. If you remember the symbol of medicine, it's the staff that's kind of woven around with the snake. And it's absolutely beautiful. You now have this absolutely gorgeous vertical hinge of the composition, and the figure on the top left that kind of reinforces it back and holds it all together. Again, an absolute loss that we can't see it now. And finally, jurisprudence. So this is supposed to be law. And the most interesting thing about this artwork I feel like is the background. If you take a look, you're going to see the patterns of the eyes and the breaks that are going to show up over and over again in his golden period artworks. And even in the foreground with this kind of octopus creature that's engulfed with the eyes, it's going to repeat itself. It's such a shame. Again, I know I'm saying this already twice, but it is an absolute horror that we cannot see this again. We're going to take a quick break from Klimt's women, and I wanted to give you a short break of how he portrays nature. We're not going to go too deep into this, but you could see that he could do a landscape if he wants. This is actually absolutely wonderful, this farmhouse with bird trees. He is able to... He is a master of color, among other things. You can zoom in, and you're going to find 1,000 different shades of green in there. If you look closer, almost at a point, you're going to see that it might be even purple or brown in some areas. But when you step back, you're going to see this green. And this is what Secession and what Art Nouveau kind of inherited from the Impressionists. And especially, I believe, from Van Gogh. Because Klimt, I know, saw Van Gogh, and even though he wasn't that popular during his time, he had a huge impact on artists later on. And I could even see Van Gogh's typical brushstrokes, especially on the left side of this painting. Same thing over here. Water is supposed to be blue, but if you zoom in, especially onto the darker part, you're going to see that it's anything but blue. And then yet, when you step back, it's going to look absolutely gorgeous to you, which is another advice I have for artists. If you want to paint a color, use anything but that color first. Try to give the feeling of it before you convey what it looks like realistically. Another absolutely wonderful painting out of Klimt's golden period. And we're going to stop at this one for a while. When I talked last time about Goya, I said that there are no lines in nature, there are only swaths of color. Klimt says no to that. There are lines, and you could see that absolutely well. Now, as always, once this portrait was displayed, it was called pornographic almost immediately. And people didn't even want to call this painting Judith. And some versions on the internet call this painting Salome. And let's think about why. The history of Judith and Holofernes in art is a very long and interesting one, and one day maybe we will even touch on it. But Judith is supposed to be this righteous woman who came into the enemy's lair, who got the commander drunk, seduced him, and then cut his head off. A lot of artworks either portray the process of Judith cutting off the head of Holofernes. We saw that with Goya, and you could see that with Gentileschi or Caravaggio. But in all those cases, you don't really believe that she could have gotten in. There's probably only 3 artists where you believe that this woman can come in and that she can kill someone. Those 3 are Giorgione, Titian, and Klimt. You could see with Klimt the absolute ecstasy of this woman. It's in a way a sexual ecstasy, yes, of being able to have the power to kill someone. You might remember that Cleopatra, for a night of love, it was promised that the very next morning the person is going to be killed, and some people even went for that. There's something in this female power that Klimt knows how to convey. And why I said that some people call this painting Salome, because by the biblical tradition, you could draw Salome however you want. She was the daughter of Herod, and she over a sexual dance, she got herself a promise to get the head of John the Baptist. And so in art history, these 2 settings are usually very intertwined. A woman holding the cut off head of someone else. It could either be Judith and Holofernes, or it could be Salome and John the Baptist. But in this case, Klimt definitely wanted it to be Judith. And I could see why. he wants you to see the power that women have over us. They are definitely the more artistic gender, the better gender, I will say, in a way, where men could easily lose their head over something and make completely illogical steps for a woman in order to achieve them. But you don't usually see the same thing go the opposite way. And in this, Klimt wants you to see women have power over you, and there's nothing you can do about it. You, the man, you're insignificant. You're right there in the bottom right-hand corner. Your whole face doesn't even need to be shown, and this could be absolutely anyone's face. You're irrelevant. What is relevant is this sexual love that's going to pervade forever, and the feeling that is going to captivate you forever. Aside from my monologue, again, the gold that he uses, I would call this, in a way, Klimt tries to reinvent iconography in some sort of strange way. If you take a look at Byzantine or Russian icons, you're going to see that the majority of their space is covered up with these leaves of gold, and only the face and the hands are exposed. We're going to come back to that later. But Klimt says, why only the face and the hands? There's other organs that I want to show. And he does just that. He sets off negative space, which is mostly supposed to be empty and supposed to contrast with the brighter figure. No, it has to be the same intensity for Klimt. It has to rip into you with the same brightness. Absolutely beautiful artwork. If I'm not mistaken, this version of Judith is in Venice. So if you're ever in Venice, in the city of love, and you want to feel a bit more love, go find Judith one. Klimt continues on with his design, and this, I believe, is a calendar designed by the secession movement. God, I would love to have this calendar around in my house. But I want you to realize that Klimt is usually remembered for his gold paintings, but he is, like I said, equally worthy as a sketcher and as a printer. As a designer of prints. My mistake. There is something beyond the gold. Now, this absolutely monstrous work was and is in the Secession building. This was a special building designed for exhibitions of the secession movement. And Klimt was in charge of it, and so he went ahead and started designing its interior. There are a couple of different feelings about this. I personally love the left side of this work, and the more it moves to the right, the more I kind of am indifferent to it. But Rodin, who visited this building, said it was the best artwork that he's ever seen, and who am I to argue with Rodin? But I'm going to focus mostly on the left side, and if you want to learn more about the others, you could do your own reading. So on the left, what we have is a depiction of the Gorgon sisters, the most famous of which is the Medusa, who, if you stare at, you're going to turn to stone. And just like I said with Judith just now, this is a motif of female power that Klimt wants you to realize. And if you see towards the left, you're going to see the beginning of his theme where he wants to explore ages of women, where despite their age and despite their looks, they still have this power, with the eldest Gorgon sister over all the others, and the others hiding their appearance behind their hair. Absolutely wonderful. I hope to one day visit this and experience it in person, because murals have to be experienced in person, just like most paintings. You can get a bit of the feeling from the reproduction, but until you see the actual thing, especially with Klimt, you're not going to find the full feeling of it. Another small sketch with which I want you to realize how much of these poses he repeated over and over again. And he did these works for the following painting. This one right here, the goldfish. Another theme with Klimt is the aquatic one. He wants to kind of have this flowing feeling, the same way that he treats the female body, where it's the lines are curving and waving away, is the same feeling you kind of get from ripples on the water. I believe that this painting was originally called To My Critics, which you could see why. Which part of the girl's body in the foreground is directed to the critics. Of course, as you might guess, immediately once this work was shown, there was a huge scandal, and I'm not even going to say what this work was called again. But I love it, and I love the way that he stretches out the format again, where a lot of artists would usually prefer a horizontal canvas position with almost equal sides. No, Klimt chooses the most uncomfortable canvas sizes to work with, and he does it masterfully. We come back to Emilia Floge, and you could see how much he has developed over the 10-ish or so years between the two portraits. If the first one is a complete symbolist painting with all of the elements of a good realist of the early 20th century, no, nothing here. His style is fully in its own right now. And you could see all of the eyes that I talked about in the frescoes for the University of Vienna, the eyes especially, how they intertwine with it, and how his dresses, how they become a part of the dress. And another thing with Klimt, whenever he shows dresses, he still accents the figure more than anyone else. This dress seems huge, but you could see the outlines and the absolutely wonderful way that it flows together with the background. And just to show you, this dress was probably more than likely real. I wanted to show you a couple of photos of Emilia in dresses designed by Klimt. In my opinion, they are incredible. What we have in the modern day with the fashion designers who try to impose their vision, that 3 strings and the shortest possible version of everything and the skinniest version of men and women are what we have to look for in fashion. And in comparison with the body positive movement that try to embrace their beauty, this is a false dichotomy. The industry is trying to push a narrative on you that you shouldn't embrace. And Floge does a wonderful job of that. You could see how elegantly these dresses are designed. I wish that someone would start up another line of the dresses, because we have plenty of photographs left over. We have plenty of photos from which we can recreate this. And these dresses are a continuation of Klimt's idea. Dresses are beautiful, and they should more than anything highlight the beauty of a person. And everyone has their beauty, and that's what Klimt tried to say. If you take a look at all of his paintings, all of his women are different. You're not going to find the same face or the same body. Every single one is different, and he makes them all look beautiful. Another dress, absolutely love this one, and you could see that this was made by Klimt from the patterns close to the neck, the triangular pattern, and the rest was probably designed by Floge. I don't want to diminish her at all. She was just as big of an influence on Klimt as he was on her. This is an incredible partnership. And the last one, full Klimt, in my opinion. These intertwining circles and probably a Klimt poster right there in the background with the leopard prints. Absolutely incredible. This is 1902, which is why I was very surprised in my research to find this artwork. Like I said in the beginning, Klimt didn't like to draw men that much, but like I said, he did know how to. But I like to stop at how he does it. He, like I said, loves women a lot more than men. And where he shows this kind of male weakness, where, for example, Michelangelo, who I mentioned earlier, or Rubens, would pile on pounds upon pounds of muscles onto men, Klimt doesn't. He shows this skinny person who, I don't know, I can't even describe it that much in words. It's a weakness compared to what he does with his female forms. This is Hope 1, in which Klimt first shows us the beauty of life And if you look at the background, he does it in an incredible way, in where he contrasts it to death. You could see the reaper that's dressed in the blue, which accents the form of the pregnant woman. And it's incredible how he can do this, because the comparison between birth and death is a natural one that always comes to our minds, but we always have to remember the beginning in order to fully understand the end. And I think Klimt does that absolutely wonderfully. I'm really fanboying about him today, but I'm really fascinated by the way he does this. How he manages to mix the female form, this erotic nature, with his deep meditations upon life and death, and how they connect in his mind and in the world. We're going to take a quick break for me to look at the chat. Seeing no questions, we are going to move on forward. Again, if you have any kind of questions, feel free to ask. I will be happy to answer if I know. All right. I know I said I wouldn't include Klimt's landscapes and his images of nature a lot, but I wanted to include this one because, in my opinion, this is a perfect synthesis of his two artworks. This doesn't have any gold in the work. This is a purely oil painting, but the way that he controls color almost makes it gold. It makes the pairs pop out at you. And I would even say that Klimt saw a bit of pointillism. He saw a bit of Seurat right here, where if you take a look at Seurat's works, especially the the Sunday afternoon on Le Grat Jeté, a work that I have very strong feelings about, but today isn't the day to voice them. But you're going to see how the combination of absolutely foreign colors foreign to each other, they mix together as soon as you put them together. Don't be afraid of color. Put it on your palette and put it forward so that people could see it, always. Another picture in gold, and here I'd like to think that Klimt had a small inspiration, alongside everyone, with a bit of Wagner and a bit of Dürer. It's later that the Nazis would pervert everything out of proportion with Wagner and Dürer, but they have a certain beauty to them, and it's this beauty of the primitive warrior nature that Klimt doesn't really appreciate. His knight is absolutely wooden, but he gets it a bit. He doesn't enjoy it, but he gets it. And this isn't my favorite artwork, I'll say, but it shows a different aspect of him that we should definitely see. And I'm bringing up Nazis for the second time for a reason. We're going to talk a bit about Hitler later on, but for now, let's keep on with Klimt. Like I said with the previous artwork with Hope, this 3 Ages of a Woman is amazing. It shows in itself the contrast that a lot of people have. And of course he does it in an absolutely gorgeous design that shouldn't work. A mostly gray, scarred background with a black spot that should bring all of the attention upon itself, but it doesn't. And in this artwork, Klimt simultaneously shows the beauty of motherhood, the horrible feeling of aging, and at the same time, he does it slightly sexually, even. Like, throughout the history of the world, there hasn't been many artists, I'll say, who have tried to make images of birth, images of the Madonna, erotic. Because it's a holy thing, and if you really believe it, it's going to be definitely blasphemous to do. But it's an interesting aspect to think about, because some of the cause of life in the world is erotic. And when we think about the Madonna, we think about the Immaculate Conception, the Virgin, which had nothing to do with this. And a lot of Christian thinkers identify this sexuality as dirty and unclean. But I like to think that it's the opposite way. That it shows the epitome of it, the aboveness, that you could have the feeling of it. the feeling of birth, the feeling of motherhood without the physical part, but this doesn't at all disqualify the feeling. And that, in my opinion, is what Klimt does. He brings us this feeling, and which is why I really dislike the people who call his artworks pornographic and who force them out in a Puritan way. I once had an art teacher in school who would censor Michelangelo and Klimt in middle school, which on one hand I understand, but on the other hand, it really, in my opinion, is the wrong way to go, because you should be censoring other things in this world. In fact, you probably shouldn't be censoring anything at all. People should know what things are, but to censor great art that shows to you the feeling just because it has a couple of naked bodies is the wrong way to go. We all have a body, and there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. And the people who censored are probably more ashamed of their own body than they should be. And we finally come to this artwork. The portrait of Golden Adele and the kiss are some of the most overstressed, some of the most overpopularized artworks. But there are two artists and that I believe haven't been damaged by popularity. Those two are Van Gogh and Klimt. I brought up Van Gogh earlier for a specific reason. He and Klimt, they could be printed on anything. They could be printed on underwear and on handbags. They can be printed on literally all kinds of merchandise, and they wouldn't lose their flair. Especially when you come and see Adele in person. I had the joy of seeing it in the New Gallery in New York City. This artwork was bought by the gallery, if I'm not mistaken, by Mr. Lauder for $135 million. And I could see why. It is an incredible work. Let's go deeper. Like I said before, you can see this is, I believe, the peak of the Byzantine impact on Klimt. He, as I said before, with icons, the only things that are actually painted on them most of the time, with the rest being gold and other color, the only skin that is shown is the face and the hands. So this, in my opinion, is Klimt's attempts to overturn iconography, to make a new image of a new world. This is his new Madonna in a way, with the same technique, but again, put on its head and transformed into something new that we never seen before. And the strangest part about this painting is that it works both by composition and by color. What do I mean by composition? Like with the portrait of Sonia Knips, the left half of the painting, half of it could be just cut off and the painting would work. But it would lose something, and that something is cosmos. You are immersed into this golden world, into this world of golden beauty, in which the figure dissolves in its surroundings and it becomes the cosmos. If you take a look at the dress, despite it being free-flowing and around and wide, you could actually see, if you take a closer look, the form of Adele's figure, which to me is absolutely amazing. How can you do that with patterns that flow into each other without a single line in between them? Just with these Egyptian patterns, again, that he fuses with them. And the biggest pattern that I love over here is the eyes that look at you from her. And she herself, from the portrait, you get a feeling that she's nervous. And Klimt is an amazing portrait artist. He shows the feeling of his subject. What shoots at you isn't the glare of the person, although there are some artists which will show you portraits that will glare into you and that they are looking at you, not you are looking at the painting. But in this case, it's not Adele who's looking at you, it's the eyes on her. It's her nature that is looking at you. It's an absolutely fascinating artwork. If you have a chance to see it, you should. It is an imposing experience. Like I said, with most artworks, you think they're bigger than they are. This one is not the case. This artwork is absolutely huge. As you can see, it took him 3 years to finish it. It's incredible. You feel absolutely overwhelmed by it, in a way. And compositionally, even this green spot in the bottom left corner, it works. It doesn't fly out of you, even though the only other place where green is on a tiny square above Adele's head. It works. It shouldn't, and yet it does. An absolutely amazing artwork. This I wanted to show you for a nice contrast in between. As Klimt was painting high society, he still had his studio with his girls. And like I said, at any possible moment, he could just look at them and they would start doing things for him and he would start drawing. Different people have different inspirations. I'm showing this to you for a reason. It's going to culminate, trust me. And this absolutely gorgeous sketch. Again, you could call it pornographic. You can call it whatever you want. But Klimt has a way of showing happiness in the moment. It could be sexual happiness. It could be the happiness from the beauty of the world around you. It could be the happiness of nature, like we saw. But just from 3 lines with a red pencil, he shows you the figures and he shows feelings of absolute relaxation. It's not tense. And if you look at the blanket at the girl's feet, it's, again, 3 lines of a red pencil, which is why I want to tell artists, always sketch, always figure out your way, and don't be afraid of trying to experiment with your pencil color. Sometimes it could shine something for you. We are returning to one of my favorite set of artworks in Klimt, and it's this aquatic theme of the water serpents. I want you to take a couple of moments to appreciate this painting. You could see how the female figures intertwine with each other. And the reason why I put the sketch before these 2 artworks is because it absolutely shows how Klimt prepared for his artworks. If you skip forward for a second, you will see how the motif of the ladies intertwining together, he does it absolutely here. And there are 1,000 other sketches, some of which, like I said, were lost for us. But the ones that we have show his process. And I find it so amazing how he can transform the body and how it so organically flows into patterns. Contemporary artists make the mistake by which they believe, by showing how unrealistic this world is and how abstract it is, they could discover some fundamental truth. I don't believe the truth is there. The truth, in my opinion, is finding this combination of the very real in this world, the very real beauty of women, and the absolutely fantastical, this magical realism that comes upon us in the form of gold, in the form of love, in the form of religion, in the form of the sense of humor that Macquart taught him earlier, if you remember, and how it all ties together in order to form our feelings, because our feelings are not realistic. Our feelings are dreamy, but they also aren't fully dreamy because we have to stay a bit grounded in this world. Absolutely amazing. And this isn't my favorite one out of the series. My favorite is this, the Water Serpents number 2, where you could see that sketch absolutely quantum satis, absolutely in fullness. And why I love this one is the gaze. The gaze that the girl in the foreground shows to you, almost inviting you to look at her more. She is looking at you because she knows that she has the power. She is the one exploring you in the painting. You're not exploring her body. She is exploring your spirit. Again, and the flowing nature of the patterns that go through, and the gorgeous golden line that just cuts through horizontally through the center. And that kind of separates the artwork into the top and to the bottom half. It's absolutely overwhelming. Please take a moment to look at this one. This is probably one of my favorite artworks by Klimt. Meanwhile, I'm going to take another sip of water. All right, we are back, and we are going to continue on with our gorgeous Gustav Klimt. We're jumping from fire into flame. Danae, I'm going to remind you a bit of the myth. She was locked away by her father, the king, because he heard a prophecy that his grandson was going to take over his kingdom, and she was locked away. But Zeus fell in love with her, and he appeared to her as a golden shower, as a rain of gold that came down on her. Why is this so interesting? Because no one before Klimt really made it that intimate. Before, of course, we have some renditions of this theme, but in the Rococo, it's absolutely horrible, where they show the light, where they show the rain literally as a golden cloud coming in. I believe the closest one who got to this level was Rembrandt. But with Rembrandt, it's a different story. It's not a story of love. It's a story of this overwhelming feeling when something above you comes to you. And if you look at Rembrandt's Danae, that is in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, you're going to see that it's surrounded with this golden light. Klimt doesn't do that. He puts the figure in this, I'm going to say, a fetal position, like an embryo, who is almost ready to be birthed into this world. It's not really natural the way that she is folded in, but for our sake, it doesn't really matter because it works. And on her face, we see the feeling of absolute love and ecstasy. The way with the gold that flows down upon her from above. And she is asleep. And I think that what Klimt was trying to get here was, we don't know what we look like when we are asleep. We don't know what we look like when we feel our feelings, when we have our wildest dreams. And again, I don't like Freud, and I don't think Klimt did. Freud is an anti-womanizer, and Klimt is a womanizer. But he took a bit of Freud with him, I think, with Freud's ideas on dreams and how they express our subconscious. But he shows that in the moment of the deepest passion, in the deepest one that arouses only in our brain, only in our imagination, where we can imagine the most perfect scenarios in the world, where this happens. And it's this sleep before birth, in a way. Sleep before we are thrown into the brutal world. Sleep before we are forced to look at reality. It's the ideal dream, in a way. An absolutely gorgeous artwork. And again, like I said, Klimt knows how to do a body. He knows how to make every single kind of body look absolutely incredible. Hope number 2. This one, if I'm not mistaken, I saw in the Museum of Modern Art and in New York City. And just like all of other Klimt's artworks, it's an experience. This one, if I'm not mistaken, I remember walking into a room, and when I'm in a museum, I don't follow it wall to wall. I just let my feeling pull there. And I walk into that room, and I have a feeling that I need to turn around, that there's something behind me that I really missed that was really important. And so I turn around and I run into this artwork by Klimt. It was an experience, of course. It was... This painting, I don't have it in the best quality, and I couldn't find anything better. But if you have the chance, go to the Museum of Modern Art and take a look at it. You're going to love it, trust me. They should definitely rehang it because it's more of an experience than what people imagine it to be. Again, he has this contrast of pregnancy, where despite the body being hidden by the veil, we could see the forms of the body. Even though we can't even see them, we can imagine them. And the skull that's right next to it shows the absolutely amazing contrast that Klimt has between life and death, and the flowing of the body, that how it flows into other bodies of other mothers and other pregnant women before her. Absolutely incredible artwork. I don't have the words to describe it. And of course, we reach the kiss. Now, there are a couple of legends about this artwork, how it was supposedly some kind of marriage picture where a man wanted to propose to his girlfriend, and he gave Klimt a commission to paint the artwork. He gave her a locket, and Klimt fell in love with her. And of course, he made this artwork. he got paid and he never saw the girl in person. It could be true or not, but I like to believe that it is a slight bit. Because without loving people, you can't draw something as beautiful as this. Some misogynist artists over the century who are considered, for instance, masters of the world, their women are fake and they don't have the feeling attached to them. Klimt does this with a feeling of absolute love. Not to men, of course, because the man is turned away, we don't see his face, and we don't care about him whatsoever. He is just there. He is the decoration in here, which is such a welcome change from the history of European art. He is there to be this central column with the square patterns that run through him. But the focal point, of course, here is the woman. It's her figure, her face that's ready for the moment of ecstasy. We don't see the kiss. We see the moment right before it, and Klimt almost gives us a pause in the movie for us to appreciate this moment. Absolutely gorgeous. Despite it being, like I said, printed absolutely anywhere. You could buy merch all over the place with this. And some people might think, oh, Klimt, he's on the kiss. I've seen him so many times. But you really haven't. Because every time you come back to this work, you get you get the feelings that he wants over and over again. No matter how much times you've seen it and no matter how many times you think it has been in front of you. I'm going to hold out another pause for this artwork because this is incredible. This tree of life is absolutely amazing. Why am I saying this? Because this is another example of Klimt being a good interior designer. I couldn't get a good resolution photo of how it's supposed to be, but this is supposed to be a dining room. This is supposed to be engulfing a room entirely. This is just the central part of a much bigger artwork, and it's impossible to show in the format that I'm doing. But once again, working right to left, we can see that Klimt is not interested in the men. He's interested in the women. He's interested in the women that, in a way, make the life around us, and they are the sources of this tree of life. And once again, I believe this painting is the peak of his Egyptian influence. He, over here, uses all of the patterns, and he fuses them together into this absolutely gorgeous organic design that flows on into itself. Amazing. Like I said, Klimt liked to repeat a lot of his artworks. And this one is another unique one. This is Judith II. And this one, a lot of people really want to call Salome. And I included it this time. In my opinion, this is still Judith. This is still that continuation of the theme that women have the power over us. And in this artwork, you could see it even more than the last one. The hands, which are almost clawed, and that are grasping the hair of the man. The man is, again, irrelevant. Bottom half. We don't even need to see his full face. What matters is the pose of this vulture-like creature that's pouncing upon the people. You could believe that this woman could seduce, couldn't get drunk, and could kill a person. Would I wish to all ladies look like that? And again, if something can be called pornographic about Klimt, it's his sketches, because what was going on in his studio? There's not really another word to describe it. He drew his models in all poses. And compared to the other artists who used female models, who would love to basically put them in unrealistic, in a way, poses, although realism isn't exactly the thing Klimt is looking for. But with them, like I said, it's this difference between nakedness and nudity. Nudity is something constructed. It's artificial. Klimt wants to show you the nakedness, and it's lovely, absolutely. But I don't want you to think that Klimt could do nothing else but draw pretty ladies. He could do other things when he wanted, and With this artwork, I believe, starts his Japanese-inspired period. Of course, he had the Japanese influence beforehand, but after this, he really starts to get away from the gold, from the Byzantine and from the Egyptian influence that brought him to fame, and he starts focusing a lot more on color and on the more unique combinations that pure color can have. Because if you take a look at Japanese art, especially at the works of artists like Katsushiro Hakusai, you're going to see that Japanese art almost never mixes color. It's almost always swaths of pure color. And that's what Klimt tries to do here. This artwork, if I'm not mistaken, is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art right here. Go and take a look at it. Another amazing experience. And if I didn't include the tag, I bet you wouldn't realize that this is the same Adele that Klimt painted in gold. This is why I said that repetition is important for him. He takes the same subject and he looks at it from the opposite perspective, 180-degree turnaround. And take a look at this. Something that used to be this golden icon-looking artwork, he reduces it down to this. He takes these Japanese designs and he's moving further and further away from a realistic depiction. All he cares about now is the forms and the lines, and of course the colors that go into this. With this, I want to take a small moment to talk about two of Klimt's students, one of which I'll put in air quotes, definitely. The first one is Egon Schiele. Schiele is definitely an artist which I hope to one day do a talk upon, but it wouldn't be on YouTube because YouTube would censor me right away. Schiele took Klimt's idea of how to depict women, and he didn't walk with it, he ran with it. This portrait of Klimt I personally really love because it shows how he looked by the end of his life in this giant robe in which he walked around his studio, which he could just pull up and do the rest with his models, you know. Schiele wasn't much different. Klimt took him in, if I'm not mistaken, in 1907. He started working with him for his requests, and when Schiele started to work on his own, Klimt, through, of course, Emilia Floge, he started to introduce him to higher society, but Schiele didn't want that. He found a girlfriend out of Klimt's models, and they ran off, and this isn't a conversation about Schiele, but there's a long debate, actually, of who is, in a way, not better, but more truthful in drawing of nude models. Is it Klimt or is it Schiele? I don't know. I don't have the answer. And you should look at both, and you should figure out the answer for yourself, and you're going to discover a lot about you. But I want you to show you a quick example. This is Klimt. Like I said, what was going on in that studio is the modern openness about sexuality has absolutely nothing on Klimt. Compared to Klimt, we are all puritans in white-collared shirts. And this is Schiele. Schiele makes women more grotesque, and trust me, this is one of the lighter versions that I found, one of the less exposed. With Schiele, I believe it is the peak of nakedness, as I said, where everything is torn off and you are just left with kind of the meat and the bones. But not my place to decide. Like I said, look at it for your own. And before we get into Klimt's later artworks, we have to talk a bit about Hitler. There is a legend that while Hitler was living in Vienna before the First World War, he was an artist, as most of you know, who didn't get into the art academy, just like a lot of people of the time. But Klimt got in. He could have gotten in. He was even a professor for the time. But he rejected the norms of the academy. And so when Hitler was rejected from the academy, he went to Klimt, and he showed him some of his artworks. Now, there are two conflicting theories that I heard. The first one is that Klimt absolutely hated it, and he said that, and he told Hitler that art isn't your thing. There's an opposite one that said that Klimt actually really liked it. And I've been thinking for a while preparing this video, this talk, which one do I believe more? Which one is more right? And I couldn't find an answer for myself, because on one hand, those who say that Hitler's art is bad, it isn't. You should separate the absolute evil human being that he was from the art that he created. The art isn't actually bad. I wouldn't call it still. It just has an absence of dynamics. If you know what Nazi plans were for Berlin, the grandiose architecture, that's what his art looks like. He's more interested in the architecture than in people. Although Hitler's Madonna is actually fascinating. Maybe one day we can do a talk about Hitler's art and the aesthetics of fascism, but again, not on YouTube. And I can't decide for myself, because Klimt is the opposite. He isn't interested in man-made things. He isn't interested in architecture. He is interested in women and in the human being. And I'm really not sure. He might have absolutely hated it because it wasn't his thing, but he could have seen this interesting approach in Hitler's art. This is a tough conversation to have, because you can't talk about Hitler without thinking about the complete evil of his deeds. But compared to art, we've had a lot of evil people create great art. Which, again, I'll let you Google it and think about it for yourself. I'm no expert in the authority, and I'm not going to show his images purposefully for you to not mix your feelings, because those are completely water and fire. Different. You cannot mix these two kinds of artworks together. But in his later years, in 1913, Klimt is almost entirely alone. He gets a stroke sometimes during this time in the 1910s, in the years before the First World War. And right after he recovered from the stroke, he asked to call for Amelia. So you could see how close the bond between Klimt and Floge was. Again, such a beautiful partnership. Someone really needs to write a deeper exploration about this. But after this, he completely shifts away from his works. He's almost alone. Schiele left him. He's still in his style. He's at the peak of his popularity. And he abandons everything that made him famous. He is now focused about these clouds of people. You could still see individuality in them, and a bunch of these last works are unfinished, so we don't know where he would have gone with them. But the Virgin, for example, over here, you could see individual forms, but they clump together into this giant sphere of happiness, of sexuality. And it's not just by coincidence that this is called the Virgin. I want you to think about why. Death and life, another example of this. If before death was always somewhere in the background of Klimt's artworks where the skull was almost irrelevant, full relevance over here. And you could think back to the 3 Ages of a Woman, where back then he would still show sexuality and love, but here it's all together. And for the first time, you see a couple of men appear in the foreground of Klimt's art, which is unique. And this absolutely gorgeous Grim Reaper with the crosses patterned on him, with almost like gravestones in the shape of crosses that form death and that line up in it. Absolutely incredible. His later works, I can't say that I like them, because you can't really like an image like this. There's something dark about this where you can't really internalize it. This is another absolutely gorgeous portrait where Klimt still knows how to do his job, but you could see the Japanese influence pop up more and more in his later artworks, the dragon prints on the background, and how they almost flow together again with the dresses. how with the cloak of the woman in the front. And yeah, not much to say about this one. This is his kind of dark period where he's after his stroke, he got sick with tuberculosis, and he's almost rushing to start a bunch of works that he's never going to fully finish. And there's a couple of theories about this one. Some people call it unfinished. Some people call it his last finished work, his Adam and Eve. And you can see how Klimt goes back to his original format of the long format, vertically standing upright. This time he has a man, which you could never imagine in some of his earlier works. I still like to think that this is unfinished. We don't know where this would have gotten. I believe that if Klimt would have gone forward, he would have reached what we've seen in early German art with, for instance, artists like Lucas Cranach, where to him, women are the power and the men are just stupid people chasing around after them. We, of course, know that Klimt had the same exact opinion, but he didn't really reach that stage that Cranach had. Maybe one day we will give a talk about Cranach. The lady with the fan, this, again, full Japanese going on here. Nothing even to say. Klimt saw a lot of it, and especially in these war years, absolutely dark and horrible years with Austria-Hungary collapsing, with the whole world that Klimt had around him destroyed in the fires of war, he still manages to have this spirit of lightness, of love, that he passed throughout him. An absolutely gorgeous artwork. This portrait of Maria Monk is obviously unfinished, and once again, we don't know where it would have developed, but you could see how, again, with a couple of brushstrokes, he already gives the feeling. You could see the position this woman has, and you can see how she looks down upon the viewer. Even though the dress is unfinished, and it's, again, 3 lines, we can anticipate how it was going to go. It was going to be just as bright and just as vibrant as the other ones that he would have completed. And I'd like to finish off with this one, this dancer, which is also unfinished. I believe this one is in the new gallery. And I believe that this is a good final, because after this, Klimt died of tuberculosis, not finishing any of his artworks, with 40 children born out of wedlock. He thought that Schiele was going to continue on his work, but Schiele died in the same exact year as Klimt. And it's a great sorrow that we never had anyone finish this tradition of Klimt of combining Western European art with the actual elements of other cultures, of Byzantine, of Arab, of Japanese. We, of course, had Orientalist artists who took designs from the East as an excuse to keep making the same academic Western art, but we never had this kind of same fusion ever again. And this is where I want you to stay with Klimt. He's the creator of a universal love, a sexual love, of course, for women and for beauty around him. And if you ever feel really sad, if you ever feel like you're alone, go take a look at Klimt, because his sunny artworks are going to make your day a whole lot better. Thank you for joining me. Sweet dreams tonight.